Ever wondered how cells divide and grow? It's a fascinating process, isn't it? This intricate dance of life is governed by the cell cycle, a series of events that cells go through as they grow and divide. From the moment a cell is born until it duplicates into two new cells, it passes through distinct phases, namely gap 0, gap 1, synthesis, and mitosis. Understanding these phases is crucial to grasp how life unfolds at the cellular level. Let's dive deep into the first phase of the cell cycle, the gap 0 phase. The gap 0 phase, often referred to as the resting phase, is a fascinating part of the cell cycle. This phase is like a pit stop for the cell, a moment of reprieve where it neither grows nor divides, yet continues to function. Think of it as a car that's parked but still running. The gap 0 phase could be an extended stay in the gap 1 phase or a phase out of the cell cycle. Now, cells typically enter this phase when they reach maturity, like muscle cells and nerve cells. But sometimes, cells might take a detour into the gap 0 phase due to a lack of growth factors or nutrients. While in this phase, the cell's division machinery is dismantled, but the cell can still spring back into action if needed. It's important to remember that, contrary to popular belief, the gap 0 phase is not a senescence phase. Rather, it's a reversible stage. Now that we've understood the G0 phase, it's time to move on to the next phase, the gap 1 phase. The gap 1 phase, or G1 phase, is when the cell truly begins its preparation for division. This is the part of the interphase where the cell takes its first steps towards growth and division. The G1 phase is the cell's first growth phase, occurring right after the M phase of the previous cycle. Here, the cell resumes its normal metabolism that had slowed during the M phase, marking a time of resurgence. No DNA synthesis takes place during the G1 phase. Instead, it's a time for RNA synthesis. The cell produces the necessary proteins for growth through this process. This phase is highly variable, not just among different species, but also within cells of the same species. Its duration can range widely. For some cells, it may occupy about 50% of the total cell cycle time. For others, particularly rapidly dividing cells, the phase may be skipped altogether. The most significant event of the G1 phase is the transcription of all three types of RNAs. These RNAs then undergo translation to form proteins and enzymes necessary for other events in the cell cycle. The G1 phase also features an important checkpoint, the G1/S checkpoint. Here, the cell determines if it is ready to proceed into the division phase. Factors such as DNA damage and nutrient concentration are taken into account to ensure the cell's readiness for division. The G1 phase, with its checks and balances, ensures the cell is ready for the next phase of the cell cycle. So, we've explored the first two phases of the cell cycle. Let's summarize what we've learned. The cell cycle, a complex process that ensures the healthy growth and division of cells, begins with the gap 0 phase. This phase, often known as the G0 phase, is a resting stage where the cell neither divides nor grows. It's a time when the cell matures, performing its functions without the need for cell division. An interesting fact about the G0 phase is that it's not a dead end. It's a reversible stage, meaning the cell can jump back into the cycle and divide if required. Now, moving on to the gap 1 phase, or G1 phase, this is the part of the interphase where the cell prepares for division. During this phase, there's no DNA synthesis, but RNA synthesis takes place to produce proteins needed for cell growth. It's a time of resumption, where the cell picks up normal cell metabolism that had slowed during the M phase of the previous cycle. One of the most significant events in the G1 phase is the transcription of all three types of RNAs, which then undergo translation to form proteins and enzymes necessary for other events in the cell cycle. The G1 phase also has a checkpoint, the G1/S checkpoint, that determines if the cell is ready to proceed into the division phase. It ensures the cell has enough machinery to undergo cell division by checking for DNA damage and nutrient concentration. These phases, G0 and G1, play vital roles in cell growth and division. They ensure that cells mature properly, perform their functions, and prepare for division. Despite being the first two phases of the cell cycle, they're crucial for maintaining the health of our cells and consequently, our bodies. Understanding these phases gives us a clearer picture of how our cells grow and divide. Stay tuned for more fascinating insights into the world of biology.